to see all of you on this day before Thanksgiving. So, Garrett, I guess we've got about 50 subpoenas that have gone out so far. Now the committee wants to hear from groups that were involved in storming the Capitol. Where do things go from here?
Well, Chris, we've seen these subpoenas go after the leadership, the organizers, the financiers, and the people behind the Stop the Steal movement, the Rally on the Ellipse, and so forth. This latest batch goes for the foot soldiers, the organizations that provided, we believe, some of the most violent members of the mob who were here at the riot on the Capitol, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, another group called First Amendment Praetorian. These will be a little bit of a more granular part of the investigation by the committee, but we've seen a lot of what has been going out from the committee in terms of subpoenas they have sent out, interviews they have requested, documents they are seeking. We're getting very little guidance about what is coming back in. The committee says only that they've received about 25,000 documents, but they don't specify from whom they're coming or when or which subpoenas they are responsive to. So a bit of a black box situation in terms of what they are developing in terms of new information at that committee.
And yesterday, Garrett, was the deadline for the 15 Trump allies to turn over documents to the committee. Did any of them hand anything over that we know of?
The committee won't say specifically who has been responsive to what requests. What little information we're getting is coming largely from the attorneys of those who have been subpoenaed today. An attorney for Bernie Kerik, the former New York City police commissioner, told our colleague Peter Alexander that he will be responsive to the committee's requests for documents and information, but he also requests an apology and says that the committee's letter to him, released publicly in the form of a press release, had inaccurate statements about him, that he wasn't here in Washington for a meeting which he was said to be a part. So you're seeing complaints from some of these folks, but at least we are seeing, in most cases, some kind of communication between the attorneys for those who've been subpoenaed and the committee itself. I think perhaps the most notable remaining exception in terms of cooperation is Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff who's basically stopped cooperating and communicating with this committee.
And Pete, you have new reporting, I understand, about the former president's fight to keep documents away from the committee. Get us up to speed.
Right, an interesting development last night. D.C. Court of Appeals, which will hear oral argument on this issue next Tuesday, issued a brief order last night telling the lawyers for all the three parties to the case, that's President Trump, the House Committee, and the National Archives, to be prepared to address whether the court even has the jurisdiction to referee this dispute. That's probably not a good sign for the president. Now, the court notes the language of the Presidential Records Act, which is the law in question here. And it says that, normally speaking, the decision on the archives about whether to release a former president's documents can't be reviewed by a court. But there is an exception. A former president who doesn't want the documents released can sue under certain circumstances. So the appeals court says to the lawyers, we want you to address whether we even have the jurisdiction to hear this case. The fact that the court is raising this question itself, this is not something the lawyers have raised. The court came up with this question on its own, two questions, in fact, could mean that they're just wanting to make sure they dot all the I's and cross the T's and are doing their due diligence. But the fact that they're raising this question, do we even have the authority to hear this case, is probably not good news for the former president.
Yeah, Chuck, how do you see this? Realistically, what could this mean for Trump?
It's always easy to go after Pete because I agree with him. I don't think it's good news, but let me add one other note to that, Chris. Even if the court decides that it does have jurisdiction and can hear the case and can adjudicate it, you still have a very strong opinion from a lower court federal judge which holds that the documents do have to be turned over. So either way, I think this is bad news for the former president. Either the court says it doesn't have jurisdiction and the documents go to Congress, or the court says it does have jurisdiction and hears the case and upholds the lower court decision and says the documents have to go to Congress.
Okay, so lose-lose in that case. Ashley, you know Trump world. They've been fundraising off of all of this publicly. But privately, are they getting nervous at all?
Well, again, it's good for them with fundraising. Where it becomes an issue is the former president is never going to lose his hardcore base, right? And we are now operating on the assumption from what we're hearing inside Trump world that he is more likely than not to run in 2024. And because he believes, and he's probably not wrong, that if he ran, he would win the Republican nomination at least. Where this hurts the president and where people in Trump world are aware, are with those voters he would need beyond his base to be successful. So again, I realize we're talking about a very far hypothetical, 3 years in the future. But after January 6th, there were Republicans, there were independents, there were suburban women who fundamentally did not like the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol that the former president encouraged. And that is where it becomes a worry for them and a concern for them politically. But again, it doesn't really hurt him with his base. And as you pointed out, it has been quite lucrative in terms of fundraising.
Quite lucrative indeed. Okay, Ken, let's talk